I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible. It's visible.
Great. So I'll just let Aruna do the honors to start just by quick introductions of everyone. Aruna, quicker than the ones that are there on this.
Yeah.
Let's get to the point fast, right? So here, just an overview of the program before that. So we've discussed this. SSA Factor has been a program that we've started about 3 years back. The idea was that we were looking at something that needed to become relevant for architecture faculty more than architecture design, all the related disciplines, planning, more than what was going on around outside. We were hoping to tag all the real issues that we were facing while teaching, and we thought who best to teach each other than the people who are actually facing those issues. So there, the Factor program, which is faculty training, orientation, and research. So the SSA Factor comes from there. We have 3 levels. This particular program, which is it's a sort of a mid-level program, which is mostly geared towards building of capacities, also of teaching, of knowledge, and also the point over here is that these are all aspects that we use regularly in our teaching. How can we use them into, taking it into research, taking it into real practice, and how can we actually deliver as best to our students as possible. So the online, this particular BC program, building construction and whatever we are calling it, we have too many names for it, and I think there'll be an argument over the names. I'll leave it to the collision participants to have that argument. But we're basically looking at how we've heard this a lot, the practical subjects, or the subject like construction, or how these two ideas of creating and making of buildings are one and the same, and are they one and the same, how they are one and the same, and what it means for all of us when we are actually delivering the subject. So I leave it to now Aruna to just present our Dean. Aruna, go ahead.
Yeah. So I'd like to introduce our Dean, Director of the Design Cluster of Sushant School of Art and Architecture, Sushant School of Planning and Development, sorry, and Sushant School of Design. So Dr. Professor Vibhuti Sachdev, and she's an authority on Vastu Vidya, India's traditional architectural theory. Many of her publications concerns this or related knowledge systems and their expression in architecture and art. She has worked extensively on the city of Jaipur, focusing on its architecture and craft traditions. Of the 4 books she has written, she is the co-author of 2 books on the city. Building Jaipur uses Jaipur as a test case for exploring changes in planning theory and practice in India between the pre-colonial and post-modern eras. Jaipur City Palace discusses both the visual and social cultures of the city's primary former royal residence. Since publishing these books, Dr. Sachdev has been a consultant on the restoration of Jal Mahal in Jaipur, was the design curator of the artwork of its pavilions, and the co-author of the exhibition Painted Pleasures. Her latest book is on the festivals at the Jaipur court, and she is basically she is what the force behind all of us. And so I would request Dr. Vibhuti Sachdev to please take the stage.
Thank you. I like being described as the force.
Yeah, very Star Trek.
Yes.
No, and not pushing. I didn't.
Thank you for the introduction, Aruna. Thank you. I'm really glad that we are here now, and SSA Factor, as Amrita said, was born 3 years ago out of need to have a platform where we could share each other's concerns about teaching and air the awkwardness that sometimes one feels in a studio and can't really express to the students and or sometimes to the colleagues of not being sure as to how to teach. And so SSA Factor was a way of addressing not just people who have newly joined the teaching profession, but also to have a platform for the mid-level faculty and for advanced research. So so far it's been a very, very fulfilling journey, and we are very privileged to be part of that and to be able to spearhead it. Collisions was born a year later out of another need for a platform where people are able to have different views, as Hossein was saying, that to be able to, and in the current climate where tolerating an opposite view is becoming increasingly difficult for people, it is very important to have a platform where you are able to agree to disagree even, and at least hear each other out, at least have the the patience, the bandwidth to hear a view that could be completely opposite of what you may hold. And the problem is also we find that we have found that at times what happens is that you're holding that view for decades and suddenly you're asked to let go of it. It can be difficult. So so we take up that challenge, and our so far our collisions outcome has been to make the two people who are there on the platform. I'm not recommending the same outcome for you, but have the two people who are on the platform quarrel in the end with each other. So I hope we can't come to fisticuffs anyway because we are online. So we're in safe distance. So the last collisions we had, the two people just rose up from the chairs and left. So we said, hooray, that's good. But we found them having coffee later on outside and continuing the conversation, which was what was so excellent, that they knew that they could not agree with each other, yet they were able to find some sort of common ground, and both were smokers, so that helped even more. So on a serious note, I think this has been a very, very fruitful platform, and we continue with that spirit to be able to disagree if we have to, or address each other's different views. So this quickly, this BC Factor was again born out of a need to address the common question, which is how do you teach a subject which is obviously requires a physical presence in a workshop or in a studio? How do you teach it online? But also addressing the larger issues, and also addressing the fact that there are clear camps of BC faculty and design faculty. And this is something that over the interaction just before we joined here was very clear, as I asked the straight question, do you belong to BC camp or design camp? And some of the faculty didn't even flinch to answer that they were BC camp, and they were clearly design camp, or they were design camp. So it is very much entrenched into our identity as faculty that you're a design faculty or a BC faculty, and you could not be the other. But what was also interesting was this idea that design is subjective, anybody can do it, and BC is hardcore, objective. Practical was another word that came up. It was the practical thing, and design is just dreaming. And what the so-called design faculty also said, that they were scared to teach BC, which is again very interesting. And none of the BC faculty said they were scared to teach design. So whether they were not admitting or whether they were just thinking that it is obvious for architects to teach design. Obviously, they will teach design, but are they? The challenge is, are they up to teaching BC or not? That is the real test, the real heroes of the faculty group. Are you able to teach BC? Is your real test according to the BC faculty, so-called BC faculty. The other thing that also emerged was that the fact that God is in detail. This is a cliche that many BC faculty use, that unless you detail out stuff, as if to suggest that design does not consider any details, or as if to suggest that design is without detail. And you can't have design without having detail. So it is the location of God, which is again questionable, whether it lies in building construction or design. Is there are pulls on both sides which want to take God on their side. Again, it suggests a clear camp again. Also, one suggestion that, and I think we will all agree that it's somewhat a false notion that BC takes over once design stops. So as if you have to do the designing and then you worry about construction details. This is obviously, it does not sound right, but there is very much in the way one is taught, in the way one expects, that pehle design karo, then worry about the details. First you do your design, then you worry about how to build it, as if they were separate processes, and that design did not hinge on getting the construction details in place. Also, equally, to suggest that building construction did not involve a design process, that building construction details were not about design, that there was no design faculty. If one assumes that it is different, design faculty is different part of the brain from the building construction faculty as in skill, then the building construction also involves design. So that's another thing to kind of reflect on. The other common proposition was that people who want to sit on the fence safely and say, I don't belong to any of the camps, I belong to both. So their notion of belonging to both was that design and construction are two parallel streams. They are both important. So you hop from one to the other in order to achieve the final design. So these are, just to lay out the ground, this rocky ground that lies in front of you, of assumptions that are coming from the attendees of this group. So there are some hardcore positions that some people have, that they are very clear about which group they belong to, whether they, and also as faculty, that they are a building construction faculty, and some very clear that there are design faculty. So this is, I just wanted to lay the ground in front of you, and I wish you all the best, and I feel very privileged to be able to be part of this. Almost seems to me to be a historic moment, not only because of the situation we are in, but also for architectural curriculum, also to take up a subject that is of key importance. We know both design and architecture, but and building construction, because it seemingly positions itself in the crack between art and science. We haven't been able to give it its proper home in the home of architecture, and whether we'll be able to pull it out of the crack and place it within architecture is something I hope. And also, there is a new emerging field of construction history. That is a very exciting field which acknowledges the contribution of the construction workers, personal histories of the construction workers. Most of Dubai is built by Indian labor, for example. So their journeys, their histories are now being researched, and of course we also see to our horror and to personal shame of the profession of architecture, the way it has treated its construction workers. We see that around us, and we feel I don't know what we feel. So let's begin, and thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to this very exciting and enriching journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Vibhuti. So we will jump right in. We have our eminent speakers waiting. So we have Collision 2020, A Home is Not a House. So Sushant School of Art and Architecture and SSAA Factor announced Collision 2020, a platform for disagreements on the various issues related to the disciplines of architecture, planning, and design, where we exercise our right to express, fight, combat, question, oppose, challenge, and resist preset notions, dogmas, and even linear thought processes. So over here, for the present collision, we address the ever-present academic debate in architecture about our responsibility towards the industry, whether our graduates are ready to take on positions of responsibility in practices and in projects in the real world. So introducing the first session, does design serve construction or vice versa? We have with us Professor Sanjay Prakash and Dr. Hossein Bogda. I will just introduce them, a short introduction. We are all familiar with architect Sanjay Prakash, Studio for Habitat Futures. He is an architect with a commitment to energy-conscious architecture, eco-friendly designs, people's participation in planning, music, and production design. Over the years, he has integrated all his works with the practice of new urbanism and sustainability in his professional and personal life. He has worked extensively to develop future scenarios and ecological planning methods. His area of practice and research over the last 39 years includes passive and low energy architecture and planning, hybrid air conditioning, autonomous energy and water recycling and harvesting systems, bamboo, wood, and earth construction, community-based design of common property, and computer-aided design. Under his guidance, hundreds of persons have developed capabilities in performing design, conceptual or management work in these areas. His name and work is mentioned in the 20th edition of one of the main reference works in architectural history, A History of Architecture by Sir Bannister Fletcher, which we all are very familiar with. So before I leave the give the mic to him, leave the platform to him, I will also quickly introduce Dr. Hossein Bogda, Senior Research Fellow, University of Westminster. Dr. Hossein Bogda is a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Westminster School of Architecture and Cities, London. Previously, Reader, Associate Professor in Architecture Technology at the University for the Creative Arts, Canterbury, UK. As an academic, Dr. Bogda's subject specialism is building technology and the environment. This informs both his teaching, UG/PG, and research interests as a supervisor of several PhD projects aligned to his research interests. These cover topics such as sustainable design, innovative low-tech, low-energy, low-impact buildings, spatial experience of users, and issues of culture and architecture. Alongside his academic role, he keeps busy with a program of scholarly activities, seven publications in the last 12 months, including 2 edited books. So, we will not hold back any longer. So, Amrita, I request you to stop presenting. We can leave the stage to our protagonist. We will call Sanjay Prakash. So, I request you to present and take over. We'll wait for a few moments, like we were discussing earlier. We need to be patient with this platform. So Yeah.
Yeah. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I hope my screen can be seen now.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay, great.
So we can do it on a presentation mode, so it'll be better because right now it's
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks. Perfect.
Okay. No, but then I can't see anything. But that's okay. I can manage. So thank you, SSAA, and thank you, Vibhuti, for having me and us here.
Would you like me to present
Uh,
for you, Sanjay? Maybe that'll be better. It'll be easier for you. I can
who
just
is that
Amrita.
calling?
I'll just do it. Amrita.
Yes, please do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I can always say next.
Yes, please.
Okay, so
One second.
something's gone wrong on my end.
Is it visible? Yes.
Yeah. So thank you. And I thought this description by Vibhuti was excellent because it's true that I have also come across this whole BC versus design kind of issues. And even though I don't think I'm being equivocal here, but on the other hand, I just feel there are two sides of the same coin, not two parallel tracks, and you don't jump from one to the other, but they are two sides of the same coin. So you don't get the coin unless you have both sides, right? And really speaking, the argument I'm going to present today is something that is one of my favorite arguments, and that is that you cannot design unless you have a good mastery of building construction. Uh, yes, I know that there is a whole poetic side to architecture, and I know that there is a whole practical side to architecture, or a construction side, or an engineering side, if I may call it that. But clearly, we could not have had a wide variety of modern buildings had the architects not involved themselves sufficiently with technology, and they had tried to simply create great spaces without the knowledge of how to put it together. So I've put together 4 examples from my own work which illustrate that thought, and let me present that to you. It can be a lot shorter, and I think Hossein has a longer presentation after this, after which we shall engage. So here I go. So this is Mati Ghar. A lot of you might know it. It's right in the center of Delhi, and it was when it was built at that time, the world's largest stabilized earth dome. Technically, it's not a stabilized earth dome anymore. This picture was taken just after it was built, so it was then. But because of some calculations that we did later, and we discovered that it cannot be proofed for anything more than a temporary structure, we had replaced the dome with a fired brick dome about 2 years after it was constructed in 1991. And that is how it has remained since then, especially because the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts, which is where this structure is located, is quite careful that it wants my signature on the structural safety and so on, because frankly, in a structure like this, there could be no structural engineer. Uh, yeah, next, Amrita. Yeah, so this gives you a little bit of a close-up view on the left and an interior view on the right. This was during construction. Then this part was vaulted over, so it's a completely dark space inside, like a lot of exhibition halls are. And I think what we had worked out was quite interesting. We had worked out a method of stabilizing soil blocks, albeit with cement, and compressing them before curing them, so as to be able to achieve varying degrees of strength. So this particular structure was built with, as far as I remember, some 4% stabilization and 6% stabilization and 8% stabilization, depending on the loads it had to carry. Now, when I thought of this building, I was given a brief that I might call a poetic brief done by a German person I don't remember the name of, who was an exhibition designer, and he had given an experiential brief of what should be seen first and then next and so on and so forth, and that I translated into this building. So you could say that that brief did not have construction in mind, but it was my task as an architect to take that brief and convert it into these spaces, which have been widely regarded as one of the best and most loved art places in Delhi by a lot of the art lovers in Delhi. So, so much so that the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts last year, because now the service life of this structure is completely over. So the Indira Gandhi National Center for Arts had asked me to certify it for a few more years, and I went and saw the condition. Frankly, I cannot certify it, so I certified that it should be broken now. And they said, oh no, we don't want to do that because this is much loved and still used by a lot of art lovers in Delhi and so on and so forth. But I said, look, you asked me to certify something. From a technological point of view, it cannot last any more than the 30 years. It was designed for one, extended to 2 or 3 years, and now 30 is like 10 lifespans. It really can't take it anymore. But uh, so that's the way it was. So we invented, and this would not have been possible had we not invented a whole block press machine which would compress these blocks and allow the mixing and the compression to take place. Then we kind of developed and placed these steel beams that you see in the picture on the right, and steel T irons, and then stone putties, which is a traditional Rajasthani technique for making slabs, and so on. So this building displayed a lot of technology, and you might argue that it had an equal amount of poetics in the space, maybe caused by the fact that the brief was so poetic in the first place. So let me proceed and see if there are other examples I can drum out. Amrita? Yeah, so this is a little bit different. Over the years, we had developed the art of bamboo technology in the sense that we had seen that bamboo is an excellent material, though seen as a poor man's timber. It was one of the most ecological materials that could have the potential of replacing steel for large spans. And therefore, when I got this chance to design the India Pavilion at the Shanghai Expo in 2010, I took that chance and designed a dome, which happened to be at that time, again, neither the Matighar dome nor this dome exists anymore. But at that time, this was the world's largest bamboo dome. So it is all of 35 or 40 meters in span. The earlier one was 10 meters. And again, I think the bulk of the architectural spatial feeling in this building comes about because of this dome. Even though you could say that it was designed as a construction piece, meaning that we wanted to demonstrate that bamboo technology could be made to last with good treatments for preservatives and could manage to take the kind of stresses that would come on a very large span structure like this, and so on. And of course, we took help. We took help from an architect called Simon Vélez in Colombia, South America, who I actually thought was an engineer to begin with. But anyway, um that's not to say that engineers should be considered smaller versions of architects, but that without a sense of what you can do with material, there is no point in trying to even imagine such a space, because this space could have been imagined by somebody who was unfamiliar with the technology or had no idea how to get it done. But it simply would not have happened had it not been designed by our studio, who had by that time started developing skills in how to get it done. Next, please. Yeah, so that's another view of the outside and all the folks lining up Chinese fashion to enter the pavilion. We also had a thatch entrance foyer, which you can see on the left of this view. Uh, and this entrance foyer was in real thatch, complete with preservatives, and therefore it would have lasted also for at least 5 or 10 years instead of one. But by the rules of the expo, this pavilion was taken down. It was used for 6 months and then it was taken down 6 months later, because those were simply the rules of the game. Next, please. A different kind of example. Now, this is a building which you might say is fairly mainstream, conventional, and it is. But on the picture on the left, this is the headquarters of some corporation called Agilent, which is based in Palo Alto, California. And this was their fourth major office in the world after Stuttgart, Beijing, Palo Alto itself. And then this is in Manesar, which is near Gurgaon. So, first of all, they had a tradition of employing architects who were familiar with local technologies and locally. So that put us, on a good wicket as far as trying to get appointed is concerned, which of course, as you see in practice, is often a very large part of what practitioners are about, how to get a commission in the first place. Because if you don't get a job, you don't get to display anything, neither design nor building construction. Anyway, this is not so much about building construction, though you see the lightweight structures over the bus stand on the left. But this is about the fact that we used some very unusual air conditioning technologies to get this building up. So in the conceptual stage itself, we worked out that we needed to be able to air condition this building for all 1,800 people who were working inside. It's like an IT office. So we needed to get these 1,800 people working comfortably using their standard 24 plus minus 1 centigrade temperature settings. But we wanted to be able to demonstrate that this could be done even in a harsh climate like Manesar for much less cost, much less running cost. And therefore, even though we invested a lot in the air conditioning plant itself, we changed the building to have a bottom-up air conditioning scheme. That is to say, a false floor, which is expensive in its own right, a false floor where you could feed cool air, and that would just settle in the bottom 6, 8 feet, whatever, and so on. It's called displacement ventilation, technically speaking. And then we vented out from the top. Now, all this created just, yeah. So all the next, please. Yeah. So this you might see on the left. I don't know if my cursor can be seen. I presume that it can be. So this is a west wall. And being a west wall, it was treated with far fewer windows. Okay, so this was part of the building design itself, and we realized how important this feature could be, because while we didn't want to leave it blank, that would leave many of the workstations without sufficient daylight, and daylight was a major consideration in this design. We still wanted the west walls to have very minimal openings, just enough for daylight. So this west wall, which was later called a signature wall by some of the users of this building, which is rather flattering, this west wall was treated with very few windows, and so we treated it with a different kind of sandstone finish with squarish windows arrayed in a random pattern, such that we were always in control of the quantity of light that would come in. So that and the false floor, I think, were the two major innovations that would not have happened had we not been aware at the very early stages that we needed to construct this building and actually deliver results. I must also admit that we worked very early on, much earlier than is normally done, with our HVAC consultant, Mr. Gyan Modgill, who incidentally got a HVAC award for this building called the Emerson Cup, which is given by the HVAC industry for, hold your breath, instead of 200 square feet per ton, this building was designed with 600 square feet per ton. And would you believe that in the last 20 years that it's been in operation, or 16, 17 years, it has never had to use the full capacity. So it probably is using something like 800 square feet per ton. Another big innovation that we had, which I haven't shown in these pictures, is the fact that this building, there are, in most air-conditioned buildings, centrally air-conditioned buildings, there are certain times like November afternoons or evenings or mornings, where actually it is more comfortable outside than it is inside. So what do? You can't really put in fresh air because you get dust. So what we decided to do in this case was to have an intelligent air handling unit, which would convert from 0% to 100% fresh air depending on the ambient conditions outside. And so, of course, not 0%, but I think 5 or 10% fresh air blended up to 100%. And so this building uses even lesser amount of energy, zero energy in fact, in certain seasons and at certain times of the day, to keep itself at 24 plus minus 1, because it doesn't need any heating except maybe the body heat of the persons themselves. So this also means that we need sufficient intelligence in this building to monitor the inside and outside temperatures. And what it meant architecturally was that we had to work out the AHUs not only such that they were outside on the elevation, which you don't see in this picture, but also that they had something like 10 square meters of filter area, which meant that wherever the AHUs occur, a whole panel of windows is eliminated. That is where the AHU is, because you need large quantities of fresh air in order to flush the inside with outside air after filtering it. So these are the kind of examples that our office has worked with, where I believe that it would simply not have been possible had we considered ourselves purely building construction people or purely design people. And therefore, we believe that design cannot be design unless it is realized through building construction. Otherwise, you can scribble whatever you like, but it'll remain on paper. Next, please. This is the last example that I'm going to give you. This is something called the Bamboo Research and Training Center. Again, a development from our Shanghai, our China work. We had developed sufficient confidence to say that bamboo can be long-lived. It can be as long-lived as 50 years. Its major structural property that is of consequence is that its fire resistance is not fully worked out. And since we don't have a tradition of timber building in India, we also have the same kind of issues with bamboo building. But anyway, The Maharashtra government in this case had agreed to design their bamboo research and training center in bamboo. And so this is what you see. You see a few buildings in that row just outside the main circle, behind the main circle. You see a few buildings which are in concrete, but otherwise this whole structure has been built in bamboo from scratch. Next, please. So this is a aerial view of the construction site as it was just before lockdown, and it is more or less completing now. So what you see here are bamboo shingles on top of the vaulted curved roof that has these four rings that make a kind of donut. You also see the beginnings of the amphitheater that is coming up in the middle of that large courtyard that defines the training center. On the left, you see some of the concrete buildings that had to be completed earlier, and therefore PWD had designed them and gone ahead and constructed them. Now they are saying, can you clad them in bamboo? And I'm trying to resist it because that's fake. Frankly, if it is a concrete building, it should show up as a concrete building. If it's a bamboo building, it should show up as a bamboo building. But anyway, let's see whether we can resist for very long or not. They are clients after all. Now, for those of you in India who understand how PWD operates, this itself was a huge task, but we were helped by the fact that India happens to have a good chapter in the Indian National Bamboo Code, where, well, bamboo is an allowed material, structurally speaking. Nobody's used it except that we used it in Shanghai for the first time, and we probably have used it in Chandrapur near Nagpur here for the second time. So those pages are not thumbed or referred to by most engineers because bamboo is simply considered a, what should we say, a kacha material, which means that people don't really consider it a worthwhile thing to do because it won't last and it can catch fire and so on and so forth. But there are ways to work with it, and that is what we discovered. Whether that discovery was an engineering and technological discovery or whether it was a design discovery is very difficult for us to say now. Because at every stage, you shape something, then you work out how to construct it, and that process of working out how to construct it informs that shape as well. So it's not as if the poetry and the prose don't go together. In this case, they do. If I can call it poetry as what design does and prose as what building construction does, then they kind of go together. But on the whole, I would say design has to be informed by building construction, because without building construction, design cannot even exist. Now, this is a practitioner's viewpoint, and I'm aware that there are some counterpoints coming up from Hossein, but let's see how it goes. Next, please. So this is a more lower view of the same project. Next, please. And this is an interior view of that project. So you see how multiple stacked columns of treated bamboo and bamboo thatch on top and so on can come together to form a completely viable, well-lit office space. This particular one is an office space. This is a mezzanine shot. So, I mean, you see a little bit of a hole below on the left where you could fall over, but it will now have a railing, of course, made in bamboo. And after a while, I think this should be enough to demonstrate my point that this could not have happened had it not been for the fact that our office has always lived to by the adage that we need to be able to be masters of the technology that we are using to be able to make any reasonable building at all. So there is a little bit of an analogy, not just with prose and poetry, which I gave, but also with filmmaking. So there are filmmakers who can, let's say, direct a movie, which is the equivalent job that is done by the architect. So they can direct a movie and do a reasonably good job. But people who understand the craft, they understand the way movies are made. The cinematographers, for example, uh, Satyajit Ray, for example, was one such example, was an example of such a director. They can make movies which are way beyond what can be imagined otherwise. Therefore, Amrita, that's the end of my presentation. So you could get us back to our mug shots. Okay. So this is the kind of argument that I would like to lay out, that I'd actually like engineers who I find can be very sensitive people, and often they are people who tried to join architecture, some of them, and didn't make it. Therefore, they joined engineering because they had good grades in school. So I find that engineers need to be able to sketch well, draw well, and design well, just as much as architects need to be able to engineer well. And only then will we get an integrated design and construction series of structures and buildings, which can actually be called good architecture. Otherwise, we are stuck in the rut of, especially in India, of us feeling that we are architects and we are directors of the movie, while you guys are engineers and you are the equivalent of the cinematographers and the spot boys and the lights people and the sound recordist who have to make the film work. And I think that both architecture and engineering lose out as a profession if we stick to our ends of that bargain. Thank you. Back to the organizers.
Thank you, Sanjay. Hossein, would you like to say a few words, or would you like to start with your presentation?
If you don't mind, I just would like to say a few words before I start. And for the presentation, if it's possible that you run the file I sent you, so that I can simply put my notes here on the screen and go through my notes as someone is just pushing the slides forward. Is that possible?
Yeah,
Yes.
Aruna present this time. Yeah. All right.
So you can first say a few words, and then I'll start the presentation. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you first for the opportunity to that you presented me with, to be able to take part in this event. So thank you, organizers, faculty, and to Sanjay for coming and presenting an argument. However, I think the audience might be slightly disappointed, because a lot of the things that I've heard are the same things that we share, or I may have a slightly different spin on them, but as far as I see the relationship between professions and the disciplines, that very much in line with what I think. However, I have I'm introducing a slightly new dimension or a new element to the equation, which is the user or the end user or people or so on. However, in terms of relationship between and design, or between engineers and architects and so on, I haven't heard anything that I would think, oh my God, I'm going to get off my chair and walk out of the room. For that matter, even if I heard something that it is completely different to what I believe in, I would respect it, and that's absolutely fine. I think at the end of the day, we always say to our students, design is debate. Any aspects of design, whether you're designing a building, or you're designing a pair of shoes, or you're designing a motorbike, it's really about having that conversation, if not with your peers, it's with yourself, it's with the users. So it is a debate, because if you're simply designing in your studio and not even opening up the blinds to look what the outside world look like, he might end up designing something that is not useful for anyone. So without further ado, if and when the presentation is ready, just let me know. Up until that point, I can simply give a general introduction to what I'm going to talk about. In a way, I'm talking about 4 slightly different aspects to the same argument. My starting point was to build is to be. But then that became a series of, if you like, mini arguments. One of them is the home is not home. The second one is looking at globalization and how it affects identity and issues of, and the role particularly of architects or some architects, unfortunately, who I would say they sold the side and they turned their coats and became simply tools in the hands of global powers. I will then talk about commodification of the concept of architecture and home in general, and how it relates to sustainability. And finally, I will talk about that relationship between design and construction with a view to build some sort of a series of comments, concluding comments at the end. So if it looks like slides are there. Okay, so my starting point is that to build is about the be all and end all, but that's not erecting a building. Let's make that clear. Build with a capital B for me is not really just taking a lump of materials and put them together and come up with a building, but it's all the processes. And incidentally, for me, in the process of either building, producing something, or simply as a design process in the office, or there is always a component or a party that we tend to forget about. That is the user. Without the user, there is no need for us to design or to build or to invent new materials or. Of course, sometimes we make, it's just like anything in advertising. Sometimes you advertise a product and people will buy it because you told them it's good for you. I'm not sure that for architects, we should do that. I think we should listen to our fellow human beings. Okay, we might be educated, we know a little bit more than they do, but creativity and design exists in every one of us. They may not be able to express themselves, but we are there to do it for them. Next slide, please. So that's the first topic, which I will go through. And as you can see, I'm using a little bit of color coding for the slides, so you will know roughly when you see the slides how far are we from the end of the presentation, so that you don't get perhaps bored. So the blue one is a home is not a house. Next, please. Then the yellow globalization and one size, what I call one size fits all, which is really, we've gone from international modern style to a global style where wherever you go, you find the same architecture, or if you can call it architecture, the same buildings going up everywhere. Next, please. And then I'll talk a little bit about this relationship between commodity and sustainability, and how there are two perhaps conflicting points of view. Depends on where you stand. If you are the investment banker, then you see buildings and architecture and cities in a different way to if you are a member of the community who live in those cities. And next, please. And the final part of the presentation is looking at that relationship between design and construction technology. Next, please. Admittedly, the first part of the four arguments, the first and the second part take the longest in the presentation, and the last two that takes less time. So if we start with the first part, which is a home is not a house, perhaps given the choice, I would turn it on its head. I would say a house is not a home, because a home is a house plus something else. So a home is, for me, a home is more than a house. No matter. What we try to say here is that we start looking at this relationship between home and house by looking at human evolution and so advancement in knowledge and production tools, which led or had an impact on the notion of home. Early humans made use of what nature offered to make basic shelter for protection from the elements and or the dangers, whether be it wild animals or the humans attacking them. However, as methods of production evolved and the economic system evolved from a hunter-gatherer to agrarian, being able to grow food, to industrial and so on, so did the built environment. And because we can produce different things and we have access to different technologies and so on, and that can be seen in our built environment, in our buildings, in our homes, in our cities. However, it's not a straightforward relationship where you would expect that usually an increase in knowledge and advancement in technology, in science and so on would make us produce perhaps better architecture. Unfortunately, that might not be always the case. At least it may look glorious, it may look high, it may look shiny, but is it the right architecture for people? That remains to be seen. Next slide, please. So trying to address what is the difference then between home and house, and perhaps a very, very sort of rough simplification is if you like, this equation where a home is a house plus something. So a house, which is basically the material side of a structure. So it is really the physical entity. It's the materials, it's the technology, it's the building it together, it's the putting it together, it's even the design that goes into it and so on. Then a home is something different. It's something, it needs something else from the user for it to become home. So at least what we call the immaterial aspect of the home, which is a place, a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. There are other things, but given that sort of we're limited to time, we'll simply talk about these very important elements. Next slide, please. So this is just simply to make or try to explain that difference between the two. So if you look here at if we take a sort of the horizontal axis X, you have what we refer normally to as a house, which has basically a form and a function. So it's behavioral dimension and cognitive dimension. So at that point, it's a house. When it has an emotional dimension, it becomes a place. And that's when it starts becoming a home. So that means a space becomes a place when it acquires meaning as a result of the personal interaction with it. In other words, there is a user that has vested all sorts, not just material things, but immaterial as well, whether be it feeling at ease in the place, whether it be feeling a sense of belonging, whether it be memories, and so on and so forth. And that leads to place identity that can be thought of as when the individual or the user make that place as part of their self. And I will explain a bit more about this in the coming slides. Next, please. And this is where we look at, of course, here, this is simply an analytical process. It doesn't mean to say that when you live in a home, today you'll experience it in a personal way, tomorrow in a social, or the day after in a physical. No, this is simply an analytical model. Of course, at any moment, it could be the three together, it could be more, it could be less. Simply the differentiation between the three is that when considered as from the personal aspect, what we're looking at is that the home can be seen as an extension of oneself, perhaps in two senses: the subjective self, that's the I, and the objective self, that's the me. A distinction which a lot of researchers in the environmental psychology make use of. Incidentally, all this research, perhaps earlier on, even as far back as perhaps mid-80s, sort of most of this research was done by psychologists. However, there seemed to be a failure on their part to understand actually what these concepts mean to people in interacting with their spaces. And as a result, a lot of people from urban design, architecture, environmental science, and so on, started doing this kind of research, and it became what is now nowadays environmental psychology, which is very, very useful to researchers in the architecture sphere, where they want to understand the relationship between the physical space and the way we make it into a place. So as you can see here in this diagram, you have that first area at the top, which is the personal. And words that describe the personal are such words as happiness, belonging, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Then we look at home as a from a social aspect. So it's really the social home. It's the presence and relationships with other people that contribute towards a place being home. So it's not only a place often shared with other people, but is also a place allowing entertainment and enjoyment of other people's company, such as friends and relatives. To the point where sometimes our existence or our being is very much defined by that place, to the point where, for example, for the sake of the argument, where social relationships break down, the effect on our home, not just the physical home, can be devastating. In other words, you feel that you have to start from scratch. It doesn't matter. Even if you're staying in the same house, it becomes a different home. Next slide, please. And this is the third aspect of the home, which is the physical. In a way, this is just, it's in an approximation of the house. So the physical home is a physical entity, embraces not only the physical structure and style of architecture, but also the human space available. In a particular piece of research that I quite used in this context is during the interviews with users reflecting on this particular aspect, it said, "It's home because the style suits me. I like older style houses. There is more character about them. I like the old sash windows. It's just so very comfortable." Of course, there is no right or wrong, but these are the views of the user. It also involves services and facilities, such as the pipes and the air conditioning and all these things. So there's also home in which the physical environment plays a little or no part at all, such as the spiritual home, where the physical environment does become important. It seems to act as a focus for the person's activity, memories, and experience, indeed their sense of identity. So these three models of perceiving the home really what articulates the difference between a home and a house. Next, please. And if we go back to the original slide we started with, the difference, one can perhaps summarize this in that the design and layout of the house, its architecture style, its very structure is imbued with these instances of self-impression and expression, with memories and experiences. While the physical environment has a role to play in structuring what people do, what they feel, and the sort of meanings what are associated with the physical form, without those immaterial characteristics, the house could not be a home. This is extremely important. This indicates the complexity and interrelatedness of modes of home experience, the personal, the social, and the physical home. While home can be experienced in different ways, only in an analytical sense, these remain indivisible in the man-environment unity, which means that a home, what makes it different from a house is that it has a whole lot of aspects. That house is just a physical structure, and we experience that place with which now we have a sense of belonging and a sense of identity in different ways. Next, please. So hopefully by now we clarify the relation, what's the difference between a home and a house, because that goes back later on to this difference between a building and architecture, between simply a physical structure and what that physical structure can mean to people, whether be it a piece of public art or a building or. And we come to the second major part of sort of that argument, which is this globalization and its relationship with both methods of production, the way we design, the way we use materials, technology, and what we end up with. And admittedly, in this slide, what I'm trying to do is really simply condensing sort of 5,000 years of history into 30 seconds. It's really looking at sort of markers throughout history where the word globalization sort of existed. It's not new. Simply as a sort of as a concept, it has always existed. However, as something that drives our way we see things, and particularly advertising, or be it a way of thinking and so on, is quite recent. So, however, there's an interesting sort of analogy to put between how architecture or architecture thinking sort of evolved, and which is always to do with or it's related to our methods of production, what we can produce in terms of materials, and how we use that technology to sometimes realize the design we can do. And that also is related to globalization in terms of whether we're making new materials or whether we're marketing those materials to realize those so-called international designs. Next, please. Next slide. So I wanted to pick up a few points to highlight this relationship between globalization and identity. And 4 bullet points I wanted to focus on is that people who control capital and capital flow and are basically the main or the major components of this globalized system. However, they also have other professionals and other people who will help them deliver what they need to do. And that's like globalizing politicians and bureaucrats, because they are decision makers and they decide usually what gets built and where and so on, and where does the funding come from and so on. Globalizing professionals is perhaps the one issue for me here where particularly architects, when they become part of that elite, then they are lost to communities. That's why I was very much touched when Sanjay started his talk by referring to some projects that were actually, you know, that these are about the lives of ordinary people, not just those huge shiny skyscrapers that they are more of really dreams for the ordinary people, but simply they are tools to generate perhaps more capital that is controlled by the few. It always remains 1% of the population control 99% of the wealth. The rest of us, well, we can go to wherever we want to. And that system is kept in place by this huge machine of advertising, of media, of people who get you to buy products that you never intended to, and so on. So, and that including architecture, incidentally, and including sort of projects that sometimes have nothing to do with the community or the city or wherever, but simply because they make money for people, for the investors. Next, please. And another aspect of that is looking at this issue of architecture, globalization, and identity. And I picked up 3 things: iconic buildings, star architecture, architects, and cities and expression globalizing forces. And for iconic buildings, of course, we all know that perhaps it's the, or if you could call it, most significant development for the last 20, 30, 25 years is this proliferation of iconic buildings, which tend to fulfill 2 criteria: to provide a new and condensed image that stand out from the city, and to be powerful and reminiscent of important metaphors. So basically, and actually, if you look at most financial districts in whatever big cities around the world, they all look alike. You have these glass and steel towers, and that's where the money is made. It doesn't matter whether that's what the city wants or not. So the current international fashion for large and extraordinary buildings is directly concerned with globalization and identity, and not really. It's nothing to do what the ordinary people, or at least it might well be, but no one asked them, is that what they want? So next slide, please. And of course, that goes hand in hand with star architects. And we all know star architects, and we have nothing against star architects. And good luck to them, whatever they do. Now,
sorry to barge in. A little time crunch happening here, so I request you to speed up a bit, please. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, since we know a lot about star architects, I'll move to the next one. City as an expression for globalizing identity is really given that the major decisions are taken by financial institutions and their allies, whether it be the star architects or whether it be the globalized decision makers. Those who, a lot of them would have probably gone through the Chevening Scholarship, and because they give those scholarships from people from around the world, and then they go back. And I've got nothing against the Chevening Scholarship. I'm just making it. So, and can we go to the next slide, please? And as a result of that, really, what we end up with is a situation where it's not necessarily that what we want, because if you put on the one hand this kind of development at international level, wherever you go, and on the other hand the needs of people and communities, you find that that on two completely opposing sides. On the one hand, corporations and decision makers are interested in, under the guise of regeneration, they are interested in capital generation, wealth generation, but that wealth doesn't really, very rare that it trickles, small essentially it trickles to the community, but most of it goes to the capital, people who control the capital. Again, next slide, please. For them, it's the economic cost that matters, but what's forgotten in that the real cost is more than the economic cost. The real cost has an environmental cost, and sometimes that's and a social one. When I say social, including perhaps a cultural part of it, because if there is no identity, then what is left? Are we left just with physical infrastructure? And that's where you have a situation where communities and the city that is designed or that is being developed by investors, they have nothing in common. Next, please. Which brings me to the last part, you'll be pleased to know, of the presentation and the relationship between design and construction technology. Luckily, I'm not in one of the faculties, so I can say what I like. But there is nothing controversial in what I was going to say. Most of what I was going to say, and I'm going to say, I've heard it already. In other words, there is no controversy here. Unfortunately, perhaps for the audience who might have been waiting for something controversial. For me, as academic disciplines, sometimes they're created as independent disciplines or blocks or faculties or whatever, or departments, simply for management purposes. It suits managing an institution that way. In a way, they exist side by side. That's because the end result is they both influence the same product, which is the placemaking. If I were ever to run a university and it has a department or a faculty for design and construction and so on, I will have one that is called placemaking. Everything in it, from the guy who repairs, I don't know, baskets, to the guy who designs skyscrapers. It's all under one roof. So as professions, they exist in different worlds, in parallel worlds, and so on. But really, they are all, and rightly so, they are all faces to the same coin. And as production tools, sometimes at some stage, you're designing, but you're also thinking about how to detail, and as if detailing is not designing. That's design in itself, but design at the detail scale rather than as well as when you're detailing, if you forget about how actually the little detail fits into the bigger thing, then you're in trouble. So I don't see them exclusive. I see them sometimes this one is over this one, sometimes this. It depends on where you are in the process, it depends on the workflow, it depends on who's doing what. So for me, it's a mutual relationship rather than an exclusive relationship. Next, please. So based on the four sort of things we looked at, we can conclude that basically with regard to home and house, that we established that a home is more than a house, certainly, and that's because the immaterial aspects that the house doesn't give, well, that's what make the house become a home. Next, please. With regard to the relationship between this globalization and identity and so on, certainly perhaps the most salient point here is that even architects themselves, they recognize there is a failure on their part. In other words, we architects, designers, everybody, where they today you are designing a building or you are just thinking about a design approach. We failed communities simply because we had, and we still have, opportunities to influence the placemaking, to influence the built environment, and yeah, almost sometimes because people who lead the profession lead simply because of their financial status, they are in the pockets, so sorry to say that, of the globalized machine. Next, please. And of course, that in itself led to the commodification of the place and the home and the city, which meant that the interests of the communities have left behind. So perhaps that last point is poignant. To produce a house is to build. To build a house that becomes the extension of the self as a home is to be. Of course, I said the house, but it could be a city, it could be a settlement, it could be anything. It's really our built environment as a whole. So there is a difference between a physical infrastructure and something that means something to people and touches people's lives, as well as providing them with a physical structure. Next, please. So just to reflect on this, I'm hoping that sort of through the presentation I set out to argue that society is in need for architects to do something associated with both the practice and the subject of architecture to concern themselves with ways of producing a built environment. That reflects, this is important, that reflects and facilitates the way people live and where they feel that the environment is an extension of themselves, rather than just buildings that are mere physical structures without souls. And I think this is extremely important. And that reflects both on all aspects of that relationship, whether it be between architecture and buildings, between the architect and the builder, between design and technology, between the way we conceive cities and the way we finance them. So in a way, all four topics are very much interrelated, and they affect the way what kind of built environment we end up in the future. And on top of that, of course, not only we have the problem of social and the economic problems, but also the environmental problem. If these cities don't deliver what we expect them to deliver in terms of sustainability, then we have no leg to stand on in the future. Sorry for the long presentation. Thank you very much.
So, Sanjay, would you like to come in and fight?
Yeah. Well, not fight. I mean, as Hussein said, there's not very much he found in my presentation which was very objectionable. And let me say, there's not very much I find in his that is very objectionable either. But yes, it is true that we need a home to be a house plus. But here is an argument. The argument can be that as designers and architects, we can only train ourselves to design the physicality of the object. The design thinking comes in because it has to start focusing on how that physical object, which we need to be masters of, can later become owned, create identity, and then be seen as a home, as it were, to paraphrase Hossein. I don't know if that would be acceptable, Hossein, as a way of creating a common ground.
Partly, yes. Partly, yeah. I mean, I can push it, but I'll start from what you said first, and then elaborate on that.
Mm-hmm.
What you said is absolutely right. First priority is to get our heads around the physical aspects of what we want to design. However, there's a big however, is once you are a fully fledged designer, okay, when a young student or young designer just out of college and so on, that's your priority, yeah, is to get your head around the nitty-gritty of designing, of understanding how. However, when you become a fully fledged designer and you have clients, you need to make time to understand what the client needs, rather than appoint yourself as I know what the client needs. And that's
of course.
That's where the problem we have particularly with star architects, where because they are a brand, people go to them because they're a brand, not because the architecture.
No, I agree. And surely, and I think if you were to Google about me, you would find out that I'm not a star architect. So that I consider it a badge of honor rather than a problem. But it's not just that. I mean, I am also responding to the fact that, especially in India, and especially in architecture schools, we see there's a tendency for a lot of creative designers to shun technology as if it were beneath their station. And that, to my mind, is completely horrible. I mean, you just can't make a great film unless you know cinematography, sound, and lights, as well as the technologists.
It's rather unfortunate for the audience. I cannot disagree with that. I advocate that. So it's problematic for us here, because for me, design and technology do not exist in parallel worlds. They are like this. In other words,
unfortunately, what Vibhuti used,
what
Vibhuti said in the beginning, that they are like parallel tracks and you jump from one to the other, simply not true. So I would say that the only argument we have is against Vibhuti's formulation of them as parallel tracks rather than two sides of the same coin.
Okay, fair enough, but also to put it on me, but that's great. But I don't understand what the fuss is about when technology actually has influenced maybe only two areas of a home, which is a kitchen and the toilet. And Amos Rappaport said this decades ago, that the way we live, sleep, eat is basically the same. How we flush the loo and cook the food may have changed, has been influenced by technology. But our living rooms, our bedrooms are like they were since cavemen, have slept like that. We are also sleeping like that. So what is it about technology that is such a, so, and my second point is that, the buildings we describe and admire historically, we sentimentalize those buildings and then want to recreate that sentiment of what a home is. And maybe there isn't anything, a home is probably a myth. It's actually a shell that covers our pipes is what a home is. I mean,
go ahead.
Can I come in on the first point, about technology? Yeah, you say that the only technology sort of is the kitchen and the loo. I disagree with that fundamentally. The glass of the window is technology. The material of the wall is technology. I'll give you an example from Sanjay's presentation. That west wall, if it wasn't a knowledge about the behavior of the material and reducing the size of the opening so that you reduce the heat gain from the west side, because most of the day it's exposed to heat gains, that's technology. That's understanding how a material behaves in a certain way. So you block the ingress of solar radiation, you reduce the heat gain, it's absorbed by the concrete and it's vented out. That's technology. Using bamboo or using earth or that's technology. So technology is not just the shiny bit that comes off the shelf and you fix it and you turn the button and it works. That's one thing. The second one is about, I think, the sentimentality. We're not saying reproduce the way we lived in the cave. What can we learn from it? What can we learn from what our ancestors did? Is there anything we can learn that we can actually apply today in the contemporary context with the new materials, with the new technologies? That's what it is. We're not saying let's go back and live in the cave. We don't have to go back to the cave in order to learn from the experience of the past that we can use in the future. Sorry.
Yeah, so let us now turn this argument against Vibhuti more than
sorry, this was not planned incidentally.
We didn't plan it that way. I agree, Hossein. I mean, technology is not in just the way that Benham meant it when he said that 60% of the cost of a building, I mean, civil work is now only 60% of the cost of the building, and 40% and even more goes into the, what did he say, the lighting systems and the HVAC systems and so on and so forth. And therefore, he made his seminal contribution by saying, home is not a house, essentially. But, there is such a thing as identity, and you mentioned place. Place is very important. And what Benham was doing when he showed archigram diagrams was also, I mean, one of those illustrations was about a field where trailer-like environment is set up in the open air, and let's say there is a bubble which creates privacy, and that is a kind of home. Well, it would take a long time, I would feel, before something like that could become home. And that is what I think designers, sensitive designers, need to understand and work with. So it's not so much, it is really both sides. It's unfortunate that in a lot of architecture colleges all over the world, not just in India, all over the world, a lot of architecture colleges, there is this sense of materiality and non-material as being two different things, while they aren't. Actually, unless you master the material, you don't even get on to the non-material. And unless you are sensitive to the non-material, you cannot do anything sensible with the material.
Sure, I think, but isn't it the case that for people who are, say, for example, take the digital age, that, the younger generation is born with the screen. They don't know what the fuss is about drawing, using the hand. And, people who are born with high-rise housing, which of course couldn't have happened without the elevator or the glass, or the fact that, there is the walls were freed up because of a structural system. And yet in design, we sentimentalize the idea of climbing a staircase. I mean, isn't that ridiculous? I mean, why should we not start with the joy of catching the elevator and having a glass floor? Because that's what's going to happen 50 years from now, and people are going to miss the flights, the lifts that didn't work, and we had to kind of keep pushing the button for it to work. I mean, isn't this a kind of a sentimental ride that we take in the design studio? And of course, how do we then, the related question, because you would both, are, of course, very sensitive, and, Sanjay is our star architect, whether he likes it or not.
Oh, I'm not.
But to us, you both thinking minds, and won't it be kind of acknowledged that, there is a very vicious politics being played out about materials itself? Which material is good, which is bad. Concrete, bear in mind, which was sold in 50s as, it is a good material, that is why it's expensive. And people lapped it up because it was a pakka material. I mean, so there is this politics of technology, and there is politics of what spaces are good for us, and sustainability is written with this politics. It's already got, it's got termites in it. This whole edifice of green buildings is kind of infested. So how do you, I mean, how do you sort this out? What is good and what is bad?
By going back to basics, which is the training of future architects. If I see it every day, studio tutors, when they sit with the students and they start talking about a building or whatever, an object, and if the student makes a mention of about this material or this technique, the tutor, not all of them, luckily, but a lot of them would say, don't talk to me about that. I'm here for design. Go and see the technology tutor. That's the wrong attitude to train future architects, number one. Number two, we train them to be arrogant. Be a humble human being before you can become an architect. You may know more than the client, a lot more, but hear the client. See what? Don't appoint yourself as a spokesperson for the client. A lot of architects do. As for the sentimentality about the walking up the staircase, there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people, well, do we all die of obesity in the future? Well, yeah. Give me the freedom either to go up the stairs or to catch the lift. At least I don't have to share every time I want to go up to my apartment, to share the lift with 7 or 8 people and no one talk to each other, because each one of them is talking to someone else on the phone at the other end of the world. So there is no social contacts anyway, no social interaction. So we might as well forget it. It's just to get up and down. So yes, what it means is we need to have a mixed basket of things to offer the clients. It's up to the clients to choose, but they need to be informed what are the choices. You don't just tell them, oh, concrete is the best material. Yes, for what? Maybe if you are designing a building that requires a lot of strength or whatever, but if you're building something small, doesn't need to be concrete. So you make it, you sell it as if it's a good material. It's not actually good at all. A lot of bad things come from concrete, starting from that it uses a lot of energy in order to produce the cement, all the way to
carbon emissions for a start.
Yeah. So you sell it on the basis that it's good, but it's not necessarily good. When you sell more of it in the market, it becomes cheap, and that's how you make the arguments for using it. Whereas we ought to be clear right from the outset. It's good in these circumstances. It's good under these conditions. Sorry, I've spoken too much. I'll
well, Vibhuti, one of the issues, I think, there are two issues here. One is that tutors and people who are running design studios are also human beings, and they have their own worldview and limited or not so limited knowledge of the field and so on. So that's one part of the problem. The other issue is that there is a tendency to define technology in very reductionistic terms. Actually, practically everything that we have done to create any kind of space has a technological component, and often a strong technological component. Not just about the west wall having fewer openings, it's also the fact that practically every material that we use, if you notice, I don't work a lot with concrete. Every material that we use has its downsides and upsides. So for example, when I work with bamboo, I'm completely conscious that the shortcomings of bamboo are its fire resistance, and therefore it's only appropriate in certain situations. And then I have to be careful how I use it. In low height buildings, just 1.5 stories, so that people can run out in case of fire and so on. But I think there is a bigger handicap that schools have, which is that traditionally, using the Bauhaus example, they have had to teach without clients, without users. And they have taken this attitude that, okay, we are going to tell you how to build. And yet somehow the design studio, which doesn't tell you how to build, seems to occupy the bulk of the time of an architectural training. But there is a tendency to say, let's not deal with the customer, the client, the user for now, because there is enough time later in life to do that. And actually speaking, when students come for training, that's the biggest learning that I find that they have. That they actually say, oh my God, that client has so many prejudices. Oh my, and so on. So those are the kinds of things that I don't even know whether it can be taught, but I had a glimmering of it when in our first year, we were taken into a squatter settlement called Sukanto Colony below Yamuna Bridge, which was at that time one of Delhi's largest slum areas. And we were put in there for 2 weeks by our studio director and said, you need to make a creche for this community and sell it to them. I mean, it was a truly good, challenging kind of task. I know that there are people in SPA now who are trying to do that kind of thing, but how far their academic councils will accept their methods and is anybody's guess. Whatever it is, I believe that there is this missing component in architectural education that needs to be plugged. That you need to be sensitive to not just to users, but also to the person, the financial institution paying for the project, as well as to the clients who have commissioned it, as well as to the users who may not be the same organization, it may not be the same set of people.
That's a very important point, actually, because what is missing from architecture is the sense of the patron, which historically has been how buildings have been known by, what all did Shah Jahan build, as if Shah Jahan was the architect, So, but at the moment, there is this invisible user that kind of solidifies our education before we can even talk to him. So that's him or her in many cases. That's a very, yeah.
Can I join in?
Yeah, Vineet, you want to, say something.
I think it's not about concrete, it's about concrete ideas. And I completely agree with you that it's not about arrogance, it's about surrender. It's about surrender from both the client and both the architect. But there is a level of arrogance which we talked in Ayn Rand, like Mahatma Gandhi's arrogance aligned with the divine ego. He felt human injustice, for there he aligned. So if the arrogance is there, if it is that ego we are talking of belief in yourself, it is good arrogance. Would you like to comment something on that?
Arrogance is good if it's not with stupidity. Now,
Okay.
the danger is if one is arrogant but not in full knowledge of what they're talking about. In other words, you can be as arrogant as you want if you are in command of your field, but you let other people say what they want, or at least give them a chance to say what they want. There is nothing wrong with being, you have a lot of confidence in yourself, in your ability, in the knowledge that you have. Absolutely, it's not a problem. But if that arrogance is based on shaky foundations, in other words, you don't have any concrete in the foundations, it's just a few broken bricks, then that's where the problem, because you might be leading something, but down the wrong garden path, so to speak. So arrogance that's based on...
You would rate Mahatma Gandhi's arrogance as on shaky foundations, or you would call it a solid foundation?
Say that again, please.
You will consider Mahatma Gandhi's foundation as shaky or solid?
No, it's not. No, it's not. I'm talking about architects that...
No, I mean just to get your viewpoint.
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't say that his arrogance is on a shaky ground simply because I wouldn't be able to think in the way he does. So I can't say something about somebody who is in a better position than me. So at least I would. Sorry, go on.
There is So there is
Sanjay, you
another
want to say
word
something?
yes, I do. So besides arrogance, there is also the term confidence that was used by Hussein. I think they are kind of again two sides of the same coin. If you are going to be arrogant but on strong foundations, as it were, then you also need to get that balance between confidence and overconfidence.
Yeah.
And that is really the crux of the matter. If you are too cavalier about saying, oh, this I can do and I will do it in a jiffy, well, the material is going to tell you that it's not going to stand. Yeah. So you need to have just that right balance of not too much underconfidence, but not overconfidence. And that, of course, is, to my mind, it comes from practice, because finally you serve society through practice, and that is something that, at least in the current system, the college system does not allow that to happen in architecture college.
So would you say, Sanjay, that the design studio needs to, I'm just putting this proposition, that we should have essentially a construction studio in which there is a design studio?
Yeah, why not? That's a very interesting proposition, though I've never thought about it that way. But in the Indian context especially, I think it would make a lot of sense for there to be a vocationally strong studio which would deal with issues of non-material worth, issues that are not just physical, although the studio is called a physical design studio, and yet there are social and personal issues that keep coming up all the time. So that would be one way of solving it. The problem, I think, right now is that neither the regulator nor the college academic councils are easy with that model, because as they feel, studio directors are going to goof off, and this kind of mixture of everything can allow a lot of goofing off to happen.
So, Hossein, some reactions as to what happens out there.
Yeah. Fortunately, in the UK, we have a very liberal system. In other words, if you want to do something, you can. No RIBA or ARB would say to you, oh, no, we can't do that. But usually the hurdles are from within. studio tutors or whatever. Sometimes you find, I mean, I can talk of an experiment simply because 3 years ago, I was supervising a PhD student who was looking at this particular user experience and so on, and how the experience of the users can influence the design process if you want to make use of it. As a result of that, I run some small experiments in design studio, where, because we use the project's brief with the students inside the design, we write a brief, or we ask them to write a brief and design it. And usually in the brief, they talk about surface area, the description of the space, and this for the cafeteria, they have this, they have that. The experiment consisted of, instead of saying to them, design this kind of space, that has this surface area, this volume, and these characteristics, I was asking them to think about, instead of just physical characteristics of the space, what would you want the user, the end user, to feel like or to do in that space? Just rather than telling me it's a cafeteria that is 35 square meters and it has a bar and 16 stools, just tell me, how would you want the user to feel in that space? It's very difficult. I mean, it's easy to talk about it like this. It was actually very difficult to write it as a brief, and even more difficult to design to it. But nonetheless, actually some students managed to achieve certain things that probably we didn't think that you could do it. Unfortunately, to run that across a whole sort of cohort of students, wherever, you need the cooperation of all design tutors and so on. And a lot of them would say, I'm not interested in that. We've been doing it like this for years, so why change it? Unfortunately.
Yeah, I would like a couple of students who've been wanting to come in. Gurmeher, Ashni. Gurmeher.
Hello, Mom.
Gurmeher, put on your camera, please.
It would be nice to switch on the camera for whoever is intervening.
Good morning, sir. Hello, everyone. It's not more of a question, it's more of a reaction, and it's so a few months, like a month back only, I called my faculty, I called Amrita ma'am up, and I said, I can't do VC, I'm not able to do VC, I can't understand it, I can do design, I'm not able to understand how do I get myself interested enough in VC. And she just said, so you don't think materials are important enough in your design as well? And obviously then I was like, oh, it was more like a shock. And I was like, I'm not being considerate enough. And just watching, I think both of you had, like, I mean, obviously that was, your arguments were supposed to be different. And there's a common basis to the fact that you can't separate these two. They're not two different entities. And I think I'm just glad that you spoke about this, because I think personally, I mean, a lot of us students especially, we needed to hear this. So I'm just glad that you spoke, because this is something that's been a problem, like coming from, I'm only in the second year. I mean, I've graduated. I'm only in the second year. So this is more of a, it's important. This is a confusion that's been there with us. Like, okay, now it's time to do BC. I think now it's drafting time. Let's give up design. But the moment I think you sort of realize that they're interconnected, it just makes it sort of more interesting. Like now with my design, I think this sem I thought, what if I make this wood? What if I do this with the material? Add something to it. So I think thank you so much for talking about this. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Good afternoon, sirs and ma'am. I had a question. So, like, how was building construction and design integrated when you were doing your undergraduate studies? I mean, do you think that the current methodology is the wrong methodology, and should we invent a new methodology, or should we go back to the older way of teaching and incorporating of building construction in design, and the other way around?
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure what do you mean by older method and new method. For me, there is one method of teaching design. For me, incidentally, when I'm in the studio, I don't think sometimes I'm teaching design, and some of the times I'm teaching building construction. All the time I'm teaching design. When I'm talking about how you use a material and what basis why did you choose bricks and not concrete, or why did you choose timber and not steel? That's a design decision, but it's technology as well, because we're deciding to use a material. So design is not just about the spatial arrangement and the formal organization and how you generate the form and how the facade looks like and how the volumes gel and and all that. Design extends. It's not. That's only part of the design. Design also is the decision on the materials to use, the decision even on the color of the front door, you know, because the client maybe has an aversion to certain colors. So it's not as if BC is something outside the design. Materials, forms, shapes. Sometimes I start designing by having a material. For example, I could say, okay, or I could give the students to say, okay, you got timber. What can you do with it? So they have to think, okay, what's the biggest span I could use with this kind of timber? How economic it is? What kind of roof I would have? What kind of structure I would have? And so on. So all that is design. It's not just because that would lead you to shapes, to forms, to spaces, and so on. So sometimes I feel almost like, I don't know, frustrated that there is this division between BC and design.
Yes.
It's only on paper because you have a unit for design and a unit for BC or whatever. It's really, as far as your knowledge accumulation and as far as your design skills are concerned, it's the same thing.
They are the same thing.
Sorry.
So do you think that some building construction related deliverables should be a part when we're submitting our design proposals to enforce the importance of building construction in design?
That's very difficult to answer. No, I mean, that depends a lot on the pedagogy that you're undergoing, the attitudes of the various professors and so on, and even the crits that they engage with you on. So that's not a fair question, frankly. Let me just come in on your earlier intervention.
Yes, sir.
Since I am from India, I understand that whole division between building construction and design as two separate fields. It was almost like building construction is something that can be engineered and therefore is somewhat lower in the pecking order compared to design, which was architectured. And I think that is unhealthy, and I could never understand it personally, and therefore I've never understood it in my practice as well, which I guess I'm lucky about. If I can, but you know, one thing that is clearly very important is for studios to start in these post-COVID era to start asking whether we need to spend time in, should I, for want of using a better term, sell the project to the client.
Yes, sir.
I don't know whether Vibhuti is listening, and I'm sure she is. Navneet has an interesting.
Thank you, sir.
Navneet Malhotra has an interesting intervention that he or she has given by a chat, and I think it should be asked. I mean, to paraphrase it, it basically says that 3 to 5% of the entire project time is spent in the sales, as I called it. You know, convincing the client, and 95% is in working things out. Yet colleges spend exactly the reverse. I'm not sure this is true. I mean, this is what, to some extent, training in an architectural office is all about. And you get to know the relative importance. The fact is that 3 to 5%, which is spent in convincing either a community or an individual capitalistic client or whatever, is what makes the entire project viable in the first place. So it doesn't exist if that 3 to 5% time is not spent on it. So I don't know whether that answers Navneet, and if not, Navneet, you can unmute and just come in. We are badly running out of time, but I can give 5 or 10 minutes more so we can have 1 or 2 interactions.
We have another question coming in from another student, Nikita. She wants to pitch in. Yeah, Nikita, go ahead.
Okay.
Morning, sir. Morning, ma'am. So this was really insightful what you've been talking about, but also like with respect to what I've been facing in my studios, I have one question, is that what happens a lot of the times so we have 2 subjects, architectural design and building construction. Now with architectural design, the kind of things we design, sometimes it becomes very tough to imagine how it would look in reality, like barring all the models that we make, right? In reality, what it would look like, what the user would experience. It's very tough to, the materials that you talked about, how in building it's important to like understand the materiality of it. I feel like sometimes we lack because of not, knowing the value of those materials in subjects like building construction. And it prevents me at least from really imagining what my final project is going to look like. So is there like a clue that you could give, a tool maybe which would help bar this matter?
Oh, well, I can describe to you the experience from my own institution. Admittedly, at Westminster now, most of my work is as a researcher. I have very little with teaching. I do a couple of hours a week. In my previous institution, where I had a substantial teaching post, I get the students to acquaint themselves with the material they want to use. Even second-year students, I get them to mix concrete and to play with it and to find, actually, if you touch the cement without wearing gloves, actually, you get itchy skin and all these things. So, because if a students come to me and say, I'm using concrete, the first question I ask them, do you know concrete? And if they say yes, how do you know it? Oh, I read about it. No, you don't know it. At least go and touch concrete, see how it feels. There are hundreds of thousands of different concrete textures and colors and so on. So me is get to know the material. Okay, you can't know every material you come across. You cannot cast glass, but you can touch a piece of glass and see that it's cold. And get to know the materials. That way, if by the time you've reached the 5th year and you know 10 materials very well, that's quite an exploit. That's something that you achieve. Not many people go to practice and they know about 10 materials. They know very well about 10 materials. So get to know materials. Even play with them, touch them, see how they change, see how you start understanding that concrete actually is bulky, it's heavy. When you cast it on site, it's time consuming. Oh, I might use precast, or I do this, or I do that. Oh, it's costly. That's the kind of things that you need to know about materials in order to use them.
So besides working with materials, besides working with communities, which came up earlier as a good recommendation, shall we say, for SSAA, I think working with materials is also tremendously important. In fact, in my personal journey, I did not know how to make a wall, because that's the way we are in India, right? We are armchair architects with no real experience of making a wall. So I was also aware, because I became a contractor initially, that I should not be learning from my badly trained Indian mason who used a very, shall we say, a very lazy way to make a wall by laying bricks in a certain way, getting a beldar to put mortar on it, and putting the frogs up and all that kind of thing. So that was not how McKay used to teach how walls are made. So I was lucky that, and I grabbed that opportunity when I found a Swiss mason who was training 20 different masons in how to make a wall, and he was doing it, should we say, the correct way. And so I grabbed that opportunity and became the 21st student, and in a 4-day course I learned how to make a wall. And let me tell you, that has been one of my biggest prides in my practice, that I can actually make a wall, and a straight wall, and I can do it pretty fast, and I can lay as many as whatever, some 300, 400, 500 bricks an hour. So I need to just give you one more example, which can be used by colleges. Recently, I came across a website which was offering a course for young professionals. People who are just out of college working in offices. So every Thursday we would have a kind of class. And our office was the studio, and it was done virtually. And the first topic was very interesting. It was a building without steel and concrete. So they set up 4 resort programs. The students could choose any one of them and go ahead and design accordingly. And I discovered that the best way to enter this would be to learn about conventional materials, about steel and concrete, before getting into designing without steel and concrete. And that was, I thought, the exercise which gave us the most relevance in that entire course, because only when you understand what concrete does and can do will you understand in what conditions you do not need to apply it. So I don't know whether the college can do something like that. They can definitely create a 1-semester program of building without some ABC conventional mainstream material. But I guess it is up to the college to do this.
We are actually contemplating, some sort of a bunch of programs under continuing education, sort of evening classes, certificate programs, both in software materials, and I don't know if we'll be able to teach 3D building, but we'll certainly do bricklaying or something like that. Absolutely, I think that is crucial.
3D building is not something that you need to teach, because software houses and capital will ensure that if BIM has to be familiarized to architects, it will become familiarized. Much like selection from a catalog of door types or window types is ensured today.
Absolutely, and I think that is what I meant by politics of material, that, and construction techniques, that, there are certain things which you're pushed down your throat, whether you like it or not. So they become the material of choice.
So I think we are losing Vibhuti, but
yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just like any of our co-faculty, if they have any questions regarding this.
Yeah,
I have a question. So,
incidentally, please feel free to mail me at a mail ID that I have put into the chat box. And I'm sure Hosein's mail ID was also on his presentation, so I'm sure he would. I feel
I'd be
quite happy to receive questions, right?
That is so generous of you, both of you. Thank you so much. I mean, it is a really fantastic opportunity for our young faculty and students. I mean, I can't emphasize enough. Thank you both so much for that.
My pleasure. Our pleasure, should I say, on behalf of both of us.
Thank you.
Sir, I have a quick question. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So actually, when you're saying that a house is not just a home, and as an architect, we take a lot of measures, brainstorm, design, and I think one which to make it a very holistic and democratic in that way, we do sometimes do participatory design process to make it more inclusive in design. So if in design, if it's possible, can participatory construction is possible?
Yes, my answer is yes. I have done more than 300 schools in Eastern Rajasthan using participatory construction methods. I mean, I may be a star architect according to Vibhuti, but I have never lost sight of the fact that there's a society that we design for.
And so can you just elaborate on the process, that what does participatory construction means, and how it becomes an inclusive construction process?
This is going to be taking too long, and we are running on negative time.
Yeah.
So if you can find the energy to mail me on this, I will send you an article, a 20-page article on this, which is fairly racy on what we did in Rajasthan in the 1990s. And incidentally, we are doing something similar in Zamrudpur, which is where my office right now is, where I am right now. We are working with the people to try and find out how to improve their sense of identity about the village that we are in.
Okay.
That's a selfish project because we are in that village, but so what? It's also, I think, a great community project to involve ourselves with.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
So we will get this thing in and maybe share it with our participants as well.
You can do that. You can do that.
Amrita, I suggest we make a kind of a blog or some page where the questions are shared and the conversations are shared among a larger audience, whoever is here, so that there are no repeat questions and the benefit is
and also, I think the recording could be placed on that page to begin with.
Yes. We have a lot of steps to do.
Yeah,
lots of ideas.
I think we have had a really great beginning for our factor program, because a lot of notions are up for questioning right now before we start off tomorrow.
Well, good. You have to allow us to sign off whenever we can. And I'm now getting quite tight of time.
1:15 deadline, out deadline. I appreciate you reaching 1:15. That was nice. I know, but if anybody has any questions, we can catch up in a different forum after this. Thank you so much. Thank you for all your insights, and as well as Vibhuti said, for the generosity that you have shown in this.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Osin. Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.